Thank you everyone for joining in. And we will be beginning with this learning circle e-meet.
Feel free to come off mute and ask any questions about what I've said so far.
I've got a question, if that's okay.
Of course, Susan.
So you mentioned that you share all of this with the client. Is it in the way that you just shared it with us? I'm just wondering, because I've been coached before and someone's taken me through a mindful exercise at the start or done a visualization technique. And I just wondered, how many times do you tap into those techniques versus actually explaining the science of it like you just did to us? And is there one way that's better than the other?
It depends on the client, as you might have guessed. So sometimes I come to a session and a client comes to the session and I can see that client is really anxious. It has just come in from a different meeting, they're agitated, they are not present. So my invitation to them is that I can see something is, you're not here. Let's do a bit of mindfulness. Let's just do a 1-minute breathing exercise to bring you to the room before we start the session. Help them to arrive before we get into that. I also explain when I share my models with the client. So for me, part of the way I work is to help the client to self-coach. So for me, the best job is if I'm doing myself out of a job, if they can actually access those theories. So I would explain to them rather than hide it from them, rather than doing it to them. It's a shared journey for me. It's about working with the client. One of the things, for example, when I started my coaching development education, I had a reluctance to engage, for example, with psychodynamic theory because I felt it put me in charge of the client, trying to diagnose the client and deal with it. I didn't feel that was right. Now I feel if I share the theory behind it, it's not me doing it to the client, but we both actually can see what's happening and we can actually help them to find their own strategies based on their own knowledge. So I'm not sitting as an expert in there. They are also an expert on themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I love the combination because I think sometimes someone comes in and they're not in the right state to supposed to engage properly with that coaching session. They get far more out of it if they can have that mindfulness first. But I think that's a really good point. If they understand what's going on, so they can take that away out of that session and use it in other situations as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this has become more prevalent these days with people using Zoom. And like now, what is happening is that previously you would actually walk from one meeting to another meeting. You have a space to think about things. Now you're going from meeting to meeting and people are, arrive at the sessions stressed and not present. So, I think it's important to create that little bit of mindfulness or something that can help them to arrive at the session and be present. Any other questions or anything else any observations, comments about what I have said? Right. There's a question in the chat. Amygdala is quicker. Okay. It's quicker than our executive function. So what I mean is that before you actually know what's going on for you and reacting to it, your body has already been pumped full of adrenaline. So it was the physical symptom actually shows up before you can think about what has happened. Does that make sense? Yeah? No? Okay. Any other questions before I go to the next slide? Okay.
So I just, sorry, go on. Yeah, just an observation, that I have found it easier for people to understand that amygdala hijack is happening than it is to create a mindset that they don't feel that this is a threat situation, because the moment the brain perceives it as a threat situation, amygdala hijack can happen and fight or flight, etc. can happen. So intervening before that this is not a threat situation. So are there any cognitive or breathing related things that people can do at that stage, the moment they realize that, it might become a fight or flight for me?
Yeah, sure. It's a very good question. It's very individual for the person. So we all have our triggers. And that's the work we can do with the client to understand their triggers. So you can trigger a client in the session without actually knowing it. So a particular word that you might use, a very neutral word that you might use in a session, it may have been used as a pejorative word by a very important caregiver in their lives. And when you use that word, you might actually trigger something in the client, and without being aware of it. So some of the work I do with clients is about actually helping them to understand how they get triggered. So they might come to a session anxious, upset, that somebody has said something like that. And when you listen to them, you understand that what that other person said wasn't actually something, the way they reacted to it was out of ordinary. And that may be because something else is behind it. And then you work with them to understand that trigger, and then becoming, okay, I'm being triggered here. This is not something that can be, I guess, I wouldn't say fixed, but it can be helped within a couple of sessions. It's a lifelong kind of work. And I have been I was doing my team coaching training a couple of years ago, and it was the way the training was done was based on actors coming in, and you were in a situation where you were coaching people, and the actors were given a scenario how to act, and one of them acted in a way that was very disrespectful. And before I knew it, I was triggered and I was in the grip. And it was funny because, before I knew it, somebody came and pat me on the shoulder and said, you need to step out because you're in the grip and you've been triggered. And I hadn't realized it. But so it's, you think you're getting you have some kind of self-awareness. But as I said, it's a lifelong work. And aware of can trigger you. Any other questions? Any other observations, comments? Okay. I'll move to the next slide. Okay. So, neuroplasticity. So it's an important piece of the jigsaw of knowing how we can support the client to develop new skills and overcome some of their old habits. Sometimes the clients are aware of what needs to change for them to achieve their goals, but can't sustain the continuous work that needed to get rid of the old habit. And sorry, slides are not moving. Bear with me. Is that moving? Okay. Are the slides moved? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So, as I said, they know what they need to do, but they can't sustain the continuous work to be able to embed the new one. This is a bit like New Year's resolution that we do, but stop doing the activity after a couple of weeks afterwards. So, I'm going to join a gym and become fit. So part of, in my view, for me, as my job is holding the client to account and supporting them in repeating and then embedding the new habit. So, and also I explained the neuroplasticity, how it works with the client, but also there are other theories that in conjunction with knowing about the neuroplasticity that helps to embed this. So one of the tools that helps the client to understand why they are not able to sustain the longer change or even start it is Robert Keegan and Lisa Lasko-Leahy's model of immunity to change. It's based on the psychodynamic theory, and it's the one I sometimes use and also share with the client, the theory behind the model. And then explaining the neuroplasticity and how it can enable us to form new habits, then gives the client improved agency in being empowered to change the habit and achieve their goals. So there is a little piece of education for the client, so they can also then understand why some of the things that they had done in the past hasn't worked, what needs to be done to work it. So I'll stop again and see if you have got any questions. Any questions?
Yeah, Hamid, I'm not sure I'm with you on this completely.
Okay.
So what we understand is neuroplasticity, as the slide says, is the brain's ability to just adapt to change. Yet what we see with our clients and with ourselves is there is a lot of resistance to change. So where does that resistance sit? Does it sit in the brain, or where does it sit? And I don't know how this understanding of neuroplasticity will help me just enable someone to tide over that change, because I don't know where does the resistance stem from in the first place.
Thank you, Nat. It's a very good question. So in my view, resistance comes from an unconscious part of us that has a fear, but it's unconscious, that fear. And that fear is based on some assumptions that we might have. So, and the piece of work is trying to help the client to uncover those assumptions and that fear and see whether it is actually true or not. But to embed the new, change that habit and embed them to get the new goal, that what they have stopped them, and find a new, go to the gym or whatever it is to repeat. And that's where the neuroplasticity comes, helping them that by doing something repeatedly, your neurons find new paths and new habits by repeating those habits. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little better for me. So we are saying that the brain inherently has that plasticity, that ability to change, create new neural networks, because of which change becomes a possibility. We are able to execute change. However, before reaching this phase, there is change, there is resistance, there is that whole fear for disruption, which sits somewhere in the subconscious, as you're saying. And coaching is then where does coaching sit? Coaching, we of course explore the unconscious or the subconscious, and then we believe that because our brains are wired to create these new connections and make the change work, it will enable the client.
That's correct.
I'm not sure I'm 100% with you on this.
Okay.
You're trying to say something, maybe I'm not getting it completely. I'm sorry if I'm missing something.
Okay.
With you.
What are your, so if I give you an assumption, so let's a hidden assumption somebody might have, that if I go to the gym, I'm just trying to think of something different. I was recently working with a client. So the way the trying to get the hidden assumption that the client has anybody actually is aware of this immunity to change model? Anybody knows how to use it or have used it before I try to explain it? No? Okay. So what it does is, when a client says that I want to do something and I'm not able to, it doesn't seem that every time I try, after a while, I don't seem to be able to do that. So for example, one of the things that executives I come across often is ability to delegate. They have this, they want to do everything themselves, which as you get more and more senior, it becomes more difficult. You need to delegate to be able to let go and be able to deal with more strategic things, but not get into that detail. Can you, yeah, you okay? So the,
Kiran?
okay, thank you, Geeta. So they are not aware why they can't do that. And they want help with it. So if you try to say, okay, let's agree that between now and the next session, you're going to increase your delegation by 20%. In order for them to repeat this and be able to embed it, create new neuron pathways and use the neuroplasticity. My invitation for you to consider is that might not work without uncovering what their assumption is around delegation. So they might have an assumption that if I delegate, something goes wrong, I'm responsible for it, and I'm going to be found out, and I'm going to be told off or whatever. So that piece, the way the model works, immunity to change, you ask them, what is it you want to do? And they say, I want to be asked. So they want to delegate. And you ask them to say all the things that they currently do that is against them delegating. It's a bit like telling on themselves, sort of. So they write a list, and then you ask them to start writing a sentence starting with a sentence saying, I'm committed to do opposite to what they do in terms of delegating. So I'm committed to delegate over the next week 40% of my things that are under my power at the moment. And once they start doing that, you ask them to kind of check with their physical senses. What do you feel? Where is that? Do you feel anything? And when they write those sentences, they would feel some strong emotional reaction to one of those sentences, and that's where the fear is. And then you start asking them, okay, what is the fear around that? The fear could be that, I make a big mistake, somebody's not going to do their job, and I might get the sack. And then you check with them, okay, what are the assumptions around that? How accurate are those assumptions? How well-founded those assumptions that you're holding? And as you do that, then usually they find most of those assumptions are not correct. We've got some feedback. But and that helps with then think Maha, can you go on
أنا
mute, please?
لقيت قوي بعتين لي محاضرة.
Thank you. And that helps them to uncover some of their unconscious assumption. I'm not sure, have I explained it enough for you to get a sense of what the process is? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks.
Yeah. So when you get uncovered those hidden assumptions, then the next stage is to explain, okay, for you to actually embed this, it's not about doing it next week, but you need to continuously do that for you, first of all, to be able to change those neuron pulses, and neuroplasticity helps with that, to change the habits and embed the new ones. And also reduce your own anxiety of doing that. We have a kind of anxiety threshold that it gets triggered when we're doing something that we're not comfortable with. But by repeating doing something, we actually can increase that anxiety threshold. I mean, I give you an example, a personal example. I started my life as an engineer. I'm a chartered civil engineer in UK. So I started, my first job was building semi-submersible oil rigs. And I worked in this shipyard where they were building the oil rigs. And I have a huge fear of heights. And this is back in 1984, where there weren't any safety kind of health and safety stuff. So we had these rickety ladders that I had to climb 180 feet to get to the heli deck of the thing. And I remember the first days I was getting about 10 meters up and I was just feeling physically sick and I had to come back down. Over like 6 months, every day I would set myself a higher kind of level that I was going to go. I was going to go 5 meters higher. Eventually I got to the heli deck and I got comfortable with being able to deal with heights. So some of these anxieties that client might have with some of those hidden assumptions is not going to actually go away immediately. It would reduce its impact. It would reduce its poison or whatever you want to call it in terms of stopping them from doing what they need to do. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Yeah, Hamid. So one thing that I've experienced with some clients is that they say that I know this is a fear, this is an illogical fear, it is an assumption, it is not founded on fact, and yet I'm not able to overcome it. So that is where, all the tools that I have, they fail, because the client is acknowledging that this is just an assumption, not based on reality. Is there anything in your body of knowledge that, I can use to help the client?
I would turn to the somatic kind of tools. By that, I mean, if you start noticing the physical symptoms of what's going on, and then you can use so for example, if they say I have this fear, I invite them, okay, where is this fear in your body? They can sometimes say, okay, I can feel it in my tummy. Okay, what is the shape of that? It's like a balloon. Okay, what size is the balloon? And then what color is it? If that balloon was going to have a voice, what would it tell you? I find that when they start doing that, they tend to kind of feel like a disassociate from what is going on for them in kind of emotionally, and think about just as if they were looking as onto themselves to see what's going on for them. And it's a technique that sometimes helps them, if they're in the grip of something like that, to be able to step back from it. There was something else I was going to say and it just went out of my head. It will come back to me. I'll come back to that if that's okay. Any other questions? Anything else? No.
Any experience that any of the coaches present on the call would like to share with respect to this particular segment of the e-meet? Please feel free to share.
Yeah, actually, I do. I mean, one thing that I've done with clients that has seemed to be very helpful, where they may feel hijacked, and I do like the somatic methods that were discussed. I find them to be really helpful, but I try to take them outside of themselves and make them an observer. And it could be, you know, they could pick the scenario. It could be they're in the audience, they're watching a play. I've also done something where I ask them to imagine they're in their home and they have invited guests, and the guests are sitting around the table and they're standing on a balcony watching the guest. And I ask them, who's talking? And it would be, oh, it's fear, it's anxiety, it's anger. And then I said, well, who's not talking? If fear, anxiety, and anger are talking, like, who wants to talk, who can't talk? And then it'll be like compassion, love, you know, whoever they self-identify, and it really takes the temperature down, so to speak. It brings the calmness into the room. And I think that being the observer, whatever method works for the client, tends to help them get a new perspective.
That's a really good method, Joyce. I love that. I mean, what I was going to say, and I had forgotten, it just came back to me. The other thing is that helping the client to understand that so as Hamid, as a coach, there is another Hamid, which is the anxious Hamid, which is frightened of doing that, has that fear. And that's still part of me. And I can call it a name and explain to them that that anxious Hamid has been your friend in the past to help you to deal with various challenging issues and get you to get better, to get where you are now. However, when that help is becoming too much, it can become prohibitive for you to actually progress and become better. And sometimes I say, okay, if that Hamid was a cartoon character, the anxious Hamid, what kind of cartoon character would be? And usually, you know, it could be a Donald Duck. So we can say, you know, if you allowed that character to talk to you in a funny voice, how would you do that? That means it makes it less serious. It takes it a little bit, as Joyce said, it takes the temperature down. It helps them to have less of a grip on the client. But as I said, lots of these things are not something that can be fixed in a couple of sessions. These are things that are lifelong things to try to help the client to navigate. And it would always get triggered by various things, but just be aware of some strategies that they can have, that they can use at that time to help them to navigate the situation. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Or shall I go to I've got about 15 minutes and I've got a couple more slides to do. Okay. I will go to the next slide. Okay. Can you see this new slide? No? Okay. Why is it not moving then, the slides? Okay. Can you see the slides now? Okay. Sorry about the technical issues. Okay. So one of the tools that I use is to invite the clients to meet in parks, museums, galleries, and in nature. There are lots of evidence that being in nature and open spaces helps the mind to think creatively and be more generative of ideas. Also, when you walk alongside the client, it is less intimidating or confrontational than sitting face to face. It feels as if you're literally on their side. And in my experience, clients are more relaxed, trusting, open, and they can dig deeper. Additionally, when you're walking, there is a connection between the literal movement towards the goal and the physical movement. I find also the environment can offer so many metaphors to the client, and also helps with creating a stronger connection for the client between the knowing of what they need to do and feeling what they need to do. And that combination creates more and stronger commitment to doing what they want to do. I personally believe that our emotions and unconscious drivers have a much bigger role in how we act than our cognitive functions. So for me, the unconscious has primacy over the conscious. And as a coach, I believe a key part of my role is to support the client to become more conscious of what is currently hidden from them. Because as long as these hidden drivers are not visible to them, they can't use their analytical functions and cognitive functions to deal with them. So, any questions before I go to the next and final slides? Okay, there's a question on the chat about the book. It's called Immunity to Change by Robert Keegan.
Also, I would like to ask all the coaches present on the meet if they would like to share how can you or how do you plan to or how do you already create neuro-friendly coaching environment for your coaches. Then that would be great and helpful for everybody on the call. Joyce, would you like to go ahead and take the lead over here and share how do you create a neuro-friendly environment?
I think where it gets a little bit challenging is a lot of my clients are via Zoom. We're just not co-located. I mean, not even in a way that, we could say, well, let's meet up at such and such place. So I think it certainly makes it a little bit more challenging in that regard. But I think, some things that I hadn't thought of that I could do is just ask people to change their space. Doesn't mean they have to be in the same physical space. They could change the space. And I never really considered going, like, say, a client that's local saying, would you like to meet at such and such park, especially certain times of year where the weather is really beautiful. I just say, let's take a walk. I think most people are so used to someone coming to an office or doing it on Zoom or something like that. I think it would be, a refreshing change. So I'm definitely going to make a point of trying to see where I can incorporate that in.
Joyce, my invitation would be even for the clients, if they can take their laptop on Zoom, go and sit in their garden or somewhere, if they can do that, rather than in an office, and you can do the same. It's just basically change, as you said, change the environment.
No, thank you. That's very good. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that. Sorry, go on.
Harvey, Susan, anybody else who would like to share what practices do they follow in order to create a neuro-friendly coaching environment? In fact, this question is for all the coaches present on this e-meet. If you would share, what do you do as a coach? And I think all the coaches can share and learn from each other.
I think from listening, I've taken away lots of ideas of things that I can do differently, actually. But like Joyce, I do a lot of coaching over Zoom. And what I do is trying really hard to tune in to the signals from the person, whether that's body language, often the speed that they're talking at. Quite often people are talking at 100 miles an hour, and I very consciously try and slow that down. I remember touching on neuro-linguistic programming before, and how you can get someone else to come into your rhythm and things to help them find that space. So I probably more concentrate on that. But I do have a client that I meet for coffee, and I find that a lot easier because we're physically in front of each other, and I'm just getting some ideas that actually maybe we could take that coffee and go for a walk. I know a coach that specializes in coaching in nature and picking up leaves and throwing them away and what do they signify and all that kind of stuff. And I'm intrigued. I think personally I need to get away from feeling like I have to have a notepad and pen in front of me to capture things properly. So yeah, lots of food for thought coming out of this.
What I would say, if the weather doesn't allow it in Scotland, Susan, I've been to galleries where you sit in front of, together, in front of a picture, portrait, or whatever it is. Then you can ask the clients, how does your issue relate to this? And you find they come with amazing answers that wasn't apparent to them before. Or in nature, they look and we can go this path or that path, and they say, this is where I am. I've got in my career, I've got two options. Where am I gonna go? What is gonna that? There are so many metaphors in that. Nature and others, and art and other things can offer the client where it wouldn't have been accessible through their cognitive abilities. Yeah, I don't take any notes in my coaching because I tell the clients you're responsible for your own development. So you need to take your notes, and so I try to just basically listen and observe and tune in. Okay. I will go to my next slide. Okay. This is my last slide. And we've got 8 minutes. Okay. So as the science and understanding of how our brain functions develop together with our understanding of human psychology and how these two influence each other increases, new coaching theories will emerge. Coaching is a young discipline, and as practitioners, we can all support and help to nurture and increase the knowledge base through our own reflective practice, supervision, sharing our experiences with the community, and participate in research. For me, it's really exciting to be part of a profession that is developing so quickly and be able to support the development of its knowledge base. When I started my coaching development journey nearly 20 years ago, there were probably around 50 books that were dedicated directly to coaching as I was trying to learn. There are now hundreds of them, if not a couple of thousands. A new and a growing area of coaching is working with neurodiverse people, as currently most of the theories are around neurotypical people. So I'm currently supervising a very experienced coach who is doing her doctorate on working with neurodiversity and the importance of language. And so there are, people developing new theories, and it is important that we also participate and help with that. So watch this space and see if you can contribute to its development. I think that's the end of my presentation, and just going to Q&A now. Let me just put that slide up, and thank you. Right. I can stop the slides, maybe stop sharing, and then we can see everybody probably. Okay. We've got about 5 minutes for any more questions, any observations, any comments, any feedback.
Anything that either one of you would like to share with all of us? Any experience, any main thing, one main thing that you're taking away from this particular e-meet? That would be grateful.
So, Hamid, I just had a thought. When you were mentioning, looking at the fear, what is causing the fear, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be fear. It can be any emotion. For example, if you go back to your, if you go back to your example of saying that, you start the year with, let's say, wanting to exercise, right? What you're really saying is go down into what is causing that desire. It could be fear. It could also be anxiety. It could be anything else, right? But identify to say what is the purpose. The purpose may not be necessarily to lose weight, but the purpose will be to have a good lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, right? And help the client be able to identify that. I think is that what you're saying, right? They may come with a certain purpose to you, but that may not necessarily be what they're trying to achieve. And I think it doesn't necessarily always have to come from fear.
I agree with you. I don't necessarily it's always fear, but I think anxiety is a very it's one of the primary emotions that gets in the way of what we want to achieve. And it's not something new. One of the things that I believe is helping the client to realize that look at anxiety in a more neutral way rather than as something bad. Because when you start looking at anxiety as something that is bad, I need to get rid of it, you become anxious about having anxiety. If you think that anxiety is normal, it's something that we have always had. Hundreds of years ago, we would have been anxious about whether we're going to get invaded, we're going to have food to eat, are we going to get sick? And as humans, we have created systems to deal with our anxiety, and yet we are more anxious than before. So we create armies to defend us, we create police to protect us, we create a health service to make sure we are not sick, we get education to get us jobs and food, and yet people still becoming more anxious. So sometimes it's helping them to reduce that anxiety and living with it, accepting it is helpful. I agree with you in terms of having the goal, in terms of this is the goal, and highlighting this is really important. I want to become fit, I want to become a healthy lifestyle, all of that. What Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy highlight is that all of those is like somebody who has a foot on the gas and a foot on the brakes. You want to do something, go forward, and yes, there is a brake which is in your unconscious, which is that anxiety that stops you from doing that. And that's about uncovering that and then trying to get the brakes away, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Any other feedback in terms of whether this was what you wanted or not you wanted at all?
I really thank you. I thank you very much for all this information. I thought it was outstanding.
Thank you, Joyce. Very kind of you. Anything else? How would it become better? What would have you like to have seen to make it better?
I don't have any suggestions to make.
Yeah. Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. See, the thing is, when we take up coaching, initially the coachee is excited, and based on our feedback, they start taking necessary action. But after some time, sometimes I see that they lose steam and they don't. So how is it that we can ensure that they continue with whatever suggestions are given or whatever, how can we retrain their brain or mind to pursue and complete exercises that we give them or we suggest to them.
Thank you, Geeta. That's really helpful. What I would say is that I never tell client the exercises what to do. They need to come up with the exercises themselves. So, I had a chief technology officer for one of the banks who had come to me around being really anxiety of going to the boards and feeling not being able to talk and, getting tongue-tied and that. And the exercise he came up for himself, he was going to take up boxing, professional boxing. He thought, if I go into the ring, nobody else is there for me. I've got to be able to defend myself. And I couldn't have suggested to any clients, you need to take up boxing because that would help you with your confidence. They have to come up with what works for them. Secondly, I would say in terms of when clients don't continue with stuff, in my view, we do our best work in the first 3-4 sessions. After that, there is a diminishing rate of return. So a lot of the times when I contract with the client, I say to them that, we contract for 6 sessions, but I will tell them maybe after 3 sessions, you might not need me anymore. And I would suggest to them, go away, come back in a year time or whatever. But because that impetus for doing something has changed and they are already doing it, it might not be as urgent as it was at the beginning. So they lose that. But part of it is also about holding them to account, keeping their feet to the fire, checking in with them if they are doing something that they promised to do. I find sometimes clients, although they want to, in my view, it's not my job to tell them, look, you're not one. It's just highlighting it. I'm observing that, you've said you want to do this, but you keep not doing it. What's going on?
Right.
Does that make sense, Geeta?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, there are others who continue and they get results, but those who don't continue, and of course, as you suggested, it should come from them, but at times they are not able to see the light. So we suggest, like one person came to me saying that was always angry with everybody. She would retort, and the situation would go from bad to worse. So I just suggested a very simple thing like, you count 10, 9, 8, and then afterwards you speak and then you'll find. And she started doing that and then she was getting results. So she continued. So what I mean to say, sometimes it's other issues. So maybe they themselves can suggest what they need to do. But at times, probably we may be aware that, like now you said that boxing is something which next time somebody comes to me with anxiety issues, I can suggest that. It may not come out directly from their mouth, but our experience can always help them to see the solution immediately, right? So
I hope you've got good professional indemnity insurance.
Yeah.
Okay, we've run over time. Anything else? Over to you, Ritima.
So thank you everybody for taking out the time, and especially Joyce for waking up at 7:30 a.m. and Susan again waking up super early and joining us. Geeta, you too. Thank you everybody, and a special shout out to Hamid for taking out the time to planning this entire thing with me and to taking us through his journey and sharing his insights with us. And to each one of you, Susan, Harvey, Geeta, Joyce, Sunita, Saurabh, Anne, Nandini, Priyal, Nandita, Dr. Maha, and Angie, who left the call because she had some urgent meeting to attend to. for joining in and putting in the effort even when the link wasn't working well for a few of you. So it really means a lot, and I will continue hosting such particular e-meets for coaches, and so that all of us can connect across the globe to each other and talk to each other on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis, like we'll figure it out, or on a quarterly basis. And really excited. And thank you so much, Hamid, for sharing your journey, your thoughts, and your insights and learnings that you have had for over all your experience as a coach, as a mentor. And thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.